Hello all, Rick here with a look into a small craft of Star Trek looking into the origin and lore of the Class C shuttlecraft seen in several Trek properties. The Class C shuttle entered service from 2230 onwards and was mass-produced as a standardised vessel for many Starfleet ships, quickly becoming the most ubiquitous shuttlecraft of the time. The Class C was designed by Thomas Pringle with collaboration from John Eaves and Scott Schneider. It was inspired by both the original sketches of the TOS-era craft, but primarily with the design evocation of TNG added in, giving it a more detailed look and the distinct segmented hull shape reminiscent of the next-generation era craft like the Goddard. More livery was added to distinguish it, and inspired by racing stripes to evoke speed, with the added notion that different styles would denote different motherships or specialities. The Type C was in development in the early 2230s, although I would not be surprised to learn it was earlier still. It implemented the latest in miniaturized warp core technology to allow the small auxiliary craft to travel at warp speeds. In the decades before this, shuttlepods were incapable of warp travel, and while I'm not comfortable declaring the C as the first mass-produced UFP warp shuttle, it may have been at least the fastest. By 2239, they had been shipped out to most Starfleet vessels, or added as part of their inventory even on older starships. Their mission profile had been the same as most other small craft: courier duty and conveying people when transporters were not possible or favourable. However, with the addition of deflector shielding and phaser systems as well as many other subsystems, they were more capable than prior ships, allowing for a wider range of missions. This now often included scouting and using them to triangulate or speed up survey missions. These craft were updated over the years, but as we will see, that could only go so far. While it's unclear in canon, I could not find an earlier example of a warp-capable Federation shuttlecraft, possibly besides the warp sled designs that originated from Vulcan that were seen in the motion picture. However, the C would fade from use after several decades to be replaced by the Stamets type and the Class F of the original series. Now by 2250, the maximum speed of this craft was approximately warp 7 for bursts, while it could cruise at warp 5 for a short time. However, with its small core, even this is unsustainable for long-term usage. Now originally I thought that this, like many technological things that arose from Discovery's era, was asynchronous with later shuttles that we see in the original series. However, no. The later Class F could keep up with the Enterprise at cruising speeds too, meaning that yes, even the shuttlecraft of the original series were capable of reaching warp 7 of the old scale. Most of the rear section's exterior was taken up by sizable impulse engines, which allowed for rapid sublight speeds and a high turn rate. The vessel was much more sleekly designed than a starship for its need to travel into a planetary atmosphere frequently, giving it the narrower profile. The Class C was, like many ships of the early 23rd century, of larger size than later vessels, at 12.98 metres long, 5.65 wide and 3.36 tall. While a decently impressive vessel, this was frankly one of its largest drawbacks, because it severely limited the hangar space on many ships, especially when starships were becoming more refined over time. As an aside, shuttlecraft sizes have had a history of not matching between interior and their exterior, especially in TOS. The Class C could be operated by a single pilot, but ideally by two, as with most shuttlecraft. But it had room to ferry up to 12 people, although not in comfort. Storage modules lined the walls and more could be added. It also had a dedicated probe launcher for further scouting missions and an internal transporter. The rear of the vessel had only an entry hatch, which was connected inside of the docking ring, a concept that too later became superfluous with newer designs. There were several variations of this class, most notably ones where the rear bay was expanded, but systems such as the phaser arrays could be upgraded if needed. It was armed with two Type 2 phaser arrays, and likely could have had the probe launcher amended as a torpedo launcher. It came with a deflector shield as standard, but it was not exactly a very powerful one, with additional blast shielding that could be deployed internally in the event of an attack. During the Klingon War of 2256–57, the shuttles were often souped up by crews to an extent and deployed as makeshift fighters for point defense and to compete against smaller wings of Klingon ships. This was not an ideal tactic, but Starfleet really did not have an alternative in this era. Overall, it looks like this shuttle was retired from service simply because as the years passed, the technology they wanted to include got smaller, and many of these systems could be fit into a more reserved frame. While the Class C was maintained and upgraded, eventually it was just impractical as the baseline vessel. This led to the Stamets type to replace that, which also introduced a new design style more reminiscent of newer ships like the Constitution class, and then the Class F furthering on that vessel too. These older Class Cs, therefore, were retired from the fleet, but found new homes in most civilian sectors, even 150 odd years later as taxis and buses around Earth and other colony worlds, which is a notion I actually like to see. These civilian versions were defanged and most were no longer warp capable either. After this, we see a wider array of shuttlecraft in the following decades, suggesting that Starfleet began taking a different approach to its auxiliary craft. Rather than throwing all their tech into one vessel, it looks like they decided to keep the basics while creating a smaller amount of dedicated vessels for various tasks. The Class C is a nice design, but I do think it takes a little too much inspiration from the TNG era vessels. However, despite this, I can accept it as an older design, like many of the Discovery era vessels, which were then phased out with the rebuilding of a post-Klingon Starfleet. Thanks for watching this breakdown of this auxiliary craft. Until the next video, I've been Rick. Thanks again, and goodbye.